Have you ever looked at someone and assumed you knew their story? Maybe they were older, worn down, or quiet, easy to overlook in the rush of daily life. But what if that person wasn't lost, just waiting for the right moment to be heard? What if beneath that battered coat and weathered silence lived a sentinel, someone who once held the line in battles we'll never read about? This is the story of Jack Sutter, once dismissed as just another ghost of war, a muttering old man by the payphone. But in truth, he was the last line of defense against a forgotten threat. And when the moment came, when everyone else was too distracted, too doubtful, or too late, he didn't hesitate. With nothing more than exact change in a rusted analog line, he made a call the government had hoped never needed to be answered again. Because Jack didn't need recognition. He didn't need medals or parades. He just needed one thing: someone to listen. And when no one did, he listened anyway, for decades. Until the signal came back, and Jack Sutter, quiet, steady, invisible, was ready. The old man staggered into the gas station, his coat frayed and torn at the edges, boots crusted thick with desert dust. His lips were cracked, dried out from the relentless heat, and his skin bore the rough texture of years lived under an unforgiving sun. His eyes darted from corner to corner, twitching like he was tracking some invisible threat only he could see. His mouth moved in a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the ceiling fan. The signal. It's back. It's live again. There was no hesitation, no explanation, just purpose. He walked past the counter, ignoring the young clerk entirely, and stepped outside toward the rusted old payphone by the overflowing dumpster. Behind the counter, the kids snorted, amused. "Another drunk vet lost in his own head," he muttered, shaking his head. He let out a short laugh, clueless to the weight of what had just been put into motion. Exactly 5 minutes later, 3 black SUVs came roaring into the lot, tires screeching as they slid to a stop. Military police jumped out, fully armed, scanning the area with practiced precision. All of it, because that frail, forgotten old man had just dialed a frequency no civilian should have ever known was still active. Jack Sutter wasn't someone you'd notice, not anymore. At 76, with a stooped back and leathery skin drawn tight from years of sun and silence, he shuffled along the outskirts of a dusty Nevada town like a man who'd faded so long ago. Even the ghosts had stopped whispering his name. His coat never changed. A brown military trench worn thin, seams frayed, elbows mended with mismatched patches. His boots, coated with the desert's grit, moved slow but deliberate, like every step answered a rhythm he alone could hear. Nobody knew where he came from. His name didn't show up in any town record. He didn't rent a room, didn't bunk at the shelter, and no one remembered him ever staying in one place. But without fail, every Thursday at exactly 5 p.m., he appeared. Same stretch of highway, same pattern. He'd show up at the Sinclair gas station just on the town's edge, reach into his coat with trembling fingers, and pull out a neat stack of coins, always the exact change. He'd feed them one by one into the battered blue payphone mounted next to the humming ice machine. He never bought gas, never grabbed a soda, never said more than a syllable or two to the employees. Just coins, that phone, and silence. People had their theories. Some said he was harmless, just another old vet who slipped through the cracks, haunted by things the rest of them couldn't begin to understand. Others were less kind. Teenagers laughed and called him Radio Jack, telling stories about how he once claimed to hack a Russian satellite with nothing but a gum wrapper and a dial tone. Adults rolled their eyes, muttering about too many tours, too little help. Jack never corrected them, never tried to explain. He just came back, week after week, eyes always locked on the horizon, ears tuned to something nobody else could hear. Tina, the girl who worked the Thursday night shift, had stopped paying much attention. She was 25, stuck working double shifts, underpaid and worn thin by long days and longer nights. When Jack showed up, like he always did, she barely glanced up from her inventory sheet. "Colonel Cray Cray," she'd whisper to herself, right on schedule. One night, while restocking cigarettes behind the counter, she jokingly asked, "Who are you calling out there anyway?" He turned and looked at her. Not mad, not offended, just tired. "Someone who still listens," he said. Then he turned and walked back into the wind. The answer unsettled her. Not enough to stop calling him names, but enough to remember what he'd said. There were other things, too. Things he muttered when he thought no one could hear. Echo 9 still active. Signal loop isn't clean. Compromise vectors. The phrases meant nothing to her, just fragments. Maybe bits of code, maybe gibberish. Some chalked it up to PTSD, others whispered he was unhinged. But the truth was, none of them. Tina, the kids who mocked him, the strangers who stared, understood that Jack Sutter wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He wasn't wandering through some fractured memory. He was listening. He was waiting. And soon enough, they would all find out exactly who or what he'd been waiting for. That Thursday, the air baked like an oven, hotter than it should have been for early May. Heat shimmered off the hoods of cars, pavement softening under the sun. By 4:50 p.m., the Sinclair gas station was a furnace. The old ceiling fan barely moved the air, and the soda fridge wheezed in protest against the heat. Tina had just finished restocking the chips when she looked out the window and saw him. Jack Sutter, right on schedule. He trudged down the dusty shoulder like always, but something about him was off. His gait was uneven, his shirt more rumpled than usual, and his eyes didn't drift like they usually did. He was locked in, far more focused than usual. No scanning the aisles, no sidelong glances, nothing. Tina watched as he marched toward the store without the slightest flicker of recognition. Normally, even on his worst days, he gave her a nod or maybe a low grunt of acknowledgement. But today, nothing. Just the slight twitch of his lips moving silently and the noticeable tremble in his hands. Worse than usual. "Great," Tina muttered under her breath. "Colonel Cray Cray's having a full-blown episode today." He stepped inside the door and paused, not to look at the drinks, not the register. His eyes went straight to the back wall, staring as if something invisible were written across it in glowing ink. Then just as suddenly, he turned on his heel and headed right back out, toward the payphone near the edge of the lot. "Hey," Tina called after him, more instinct than thought. "You need water or—" He lifted one hand behind him in a quick, dismissive wave, not even slowing. She leaned across the counter, peering through the grimy window to keep him in sight. Jack moved with eerie purpose, like a man who had been given exact coordinates and instructions. He reached the old payphone with the urgency of a soldier under orders. He dug into his pocket, pulled out a fistful of coins, and began feeding them into the rusted slot one by one. Then, moving with a kind of fragile intensity, like a man handling live explosives, he began dialing. The keypad let out soft chirps, one after another. But it wasn't a normal number. Not even close. The rhythm was off, too careful, too deliberate. 2 tones, a pause, 3 tones, another pause, then a long, complicated string of beeps. Too long to belong to any local house or business number. Tina's brows furrowed. What the hell was he doing? Then Jack raised the receiver to his ear and began to speak. But the voice that came out wasn't the mumbling mess she'd grown used to over the past year. It was sharp, precise, crisp, like the crack of a rifle. "This is Ghost Light 9, checking transmission vector Alpha Bravo 0. Emergency override in progress. Repeat, priority echo." Tina's stomach dropped like a stone. She stood frozen behind the counter, her fingers gripping the edge of the formica. What had she just heard? Ghost light? Vector, what? Override? Her first impulse was to laugh. Maybe he was reciting lines from some old spy flick. But no, something deep in her gut said otherwise. Jack didn't pretend. Jack didn't play. She remembered her training, what she was supposed to do if anything ever fell off. Like that time with the transient last summer who came in waving a knife. Her hand moved automatically to the store phone. 911, what's your emergency? Tina kept her voice low. Yeah, we've got a guy outside the station. Older man, he's on the payphone talking nonsense, might be drunk or unstable, I'm not sure. He's acting real strange. Is he threatening anyone? No, not directly, but she hesitated. He's saying military stuff, codes, override commands. It's creepy. He armed? No, just... Her voice dropped even further. Just hurry, something's not right. She hung up, then looked out again. Jack was still there. still holding the receiver to his ear, still speaking in that same cold, methodical tone. Beads of sweat rolled down his neck, but he didn't seem to notice. He didn't move, didn't blink. Behind him, two teenage boys in sweaty tank tops had stopped to film the scene on their phones, snickering like it was some kind of sideshow. Tina stepped out from behind the counter, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mouth was dry. For the first time in all the Thursdays he'd been coming in, she wasn't sure Jack was confused anymore. She was starting to believe he knew exactly what he was doing, and that terrified her more than anything. A sheriff's cruiser rolled in slowly. No lights, no sirens. Just the lazy crunch of tires over sun-baked gravel. Deputy Ron Keller stepped out first, sunglasses catching the glare of the sun and doing nothing to hide his smug grin. Early 30s, stocky, always chewing something. Jerky, gum, maybe just his own arrogance. Behind him trailed Deputy Mark Lang, leaner, younger, and clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Inside the gas station, Tina waved them down and pointed toward the lot. "He's out by the phone," she whispered urgently. "Still talking, still saying weird stuff. It's been like 10 minutes now." Keller chuckled. "Great, another heat stroke hero." The two deputies made their way toward Jack, who was still gripping the phone with white-knuckled intensity. His voice was low but firm, eyes fixed on the barren horizon. He didn't even acknowledge their approach. "Sir," Keller said, his tone bordering on mockery, "you want to hang up the Cold War and talk to us real quick?" No response. Jack's hand trembled slightly as it held the receiver. "Sir," Keller said again, this time firmer, "you're disturbing the peace. Time to step away from the phone." Jack finally turned. His expression was unreadable. Not panicked, not confused, just cold. Focused, like a man halfway through something far more important than anything Keller could imagine. Frightened but not aggressive, his focus was razor sharp. Jack's voice was steady, flat. "Tell Fort Pendleton," he said. "Ghostlight 9 is active." Keller blinked, thrown off by the strange, calm words. "Ghostlight?" he scoffed. "What the hell is that? You some kind of movie extra or what?" Without a hint of warning, Keller lunged forward and twisted Jack's arm behind his back in one sharp move. Jack neither fought nor followed. He just stood there, still as stone, unreadable. Keller tried to provoke something, anything, but Jack gave him nothing. Lang shifted, uncertain. "Ron, maybe we should just ask him what he meant." "Ask him what? What planet he's calling home?" Keller barked a laugh and slapped a cuff on Jack's wrist. "Let's get him off the damn phone before he orders a missile strike." Keller shoved Jack forward toward the cruiser, but Jack's voice remained eerily calm, slicing through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. "Mission integrity breached," he said, each word clear and measured. "Possible sleeper compromised." Keller stopped laughing. Even Lang froze. Inside the cruiser, Lang's radio squawked softly, a live mic still transmitting from his shoulder. Jack's words traveled over the department's internal frequency without obstruction. 17 miles away, a highway patrol cruiser sat idle off I-80 behind a weather-beaten billboard that read, "Truckers Welcome." Trooper Mason Riley was half-draped in his seat, boots propped up, coffee cooling in his hand. His mind was a million miles away until those words pierced the static. Integrity breached. Possible sleeper compromised. Riley sat bolt upright, coffee forgotten. That wasn't routine chatter from a DUI stop or a fender bender. That was language he hadn't heard since Kandahar. His mind kicked into gear as his fingers reached for the radio. "Dispatch," he said, voice tight. "Can you replay that last unit's transmission?" There was a pause. The dispatcher, Laura, hesitated. "Stand by," she replied. 2 seconds later, the system echoed Jack's message again. Crisp, cold, chilling. Laura came back, her tone lower, laced with something between worry and disbelief. "Mason, what the hell was that?" Riley didn't answer. He was already scrolling through his contacts. His thumb hovered over one name like it was a detonator. Sergeant Paul Finch, USMC RTO, Regional Emergency Liaison. He tapped it. One ring. "Finch," came the voice on the other end. "Paul," Riley said, You hear anything about ghost light protocols still being active? There was silence. Then carefully Finch asked, "Where did you hear that word?" "Guy got arrested at a gas station," Riley said. "Used the phrase Ghost Light 9. Said a sleeper might be compromised." Another pause, a deeper silence. Then Finch spoke. 3 words. "Lock that town down." Back at the station, Jack was being guided into the back of the cruiser. He didn't resist. Just walked with quiet composure, a faint knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. 20 minutes later, the station lot had mostly returned to its typical sleepy rhythm. The teenagers had wandered off in search of something more interesting. Tina had gone back behind the counter, though she kept peeking anxiously at the parking lot every few seconds. Inside, the deputies were finishing up a short incident report. Routine stuff. Keller cracked jokes as he scribbled. "Operation Crazy Grandpa," he muttered, chuckling. That's when they heard it. Low, synchronized engine hums. More than one. Then they saw them. 3 black SUVs gliding silently into the lot, smooth and deliberate. No sirens, no lights, no hesitation, like predators moving through still water. The first SUV stopped at a diagonal angle. Its doors opened in perfect unison. Out of the front passenger seat stepped a man, tall, squared shoulders, clean cut, wearing a crisp military police uniform. But the patches on his arms weren't standard issue. They weren't local either. His eyes swept across the scene, locked on Jack in the back seat, and then, without a word, he walked straight toward the cruiser. Keller stood frozen mid-sip, his iced tea slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor with a hollow clunk. Lang instinctively stepped back. "You see that patch?" Lang whispered. "Yeah," Keller murmured. "That's not local." The MP reached the cruiser. With a simple motion, he signaled for the door to be opened. Jack sat upright, calm, composed, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. No surprise, no confusion, only familiarity. The MP gave him a brief nod. "Ghost Light 9. Jack blinked once. "Authorization code?" Without hesitation, the MP responded, "Vector Echo 6, Override Alpha, confirmed." Jack's smile deepened slightly. "Took you long enough." Tina had stepped outside, phone in both hands, eyes wide as she watched the silent choreography unfold. The phone felt heavier than it should have as Jack took it, the air charged with something invisible but undeniable. Bystanders froze mid-step, their phones half-raised, not even aware they'd started recording. No one knew if they were witnessing reality or stumbling into the middle of a movie scene. Keller stood frozen halfway between duty and uncertainty, debating whether to assert himself as a manager or simply vanish into the background. "Excuse me, sir. Can someone tell me what this is about?" Keller asked, voice strained with forced authority. The military policeman didn't respond, eyes fixed unwaveringly on Jack. Then the second MP emerged from the SUV, a heavy matte gray satellite phone in hand, clearly military hardware. Without a word, he passed it to the first MP, who turned and extended it to Jack. "It's for you." Jack took it without hesitation. "Sutter." And there was a pause, just long enough to hold its own weight, before a voice answered, deep, calm, and unmistakably official. "Colonel Sutter, we never stop listening." Jack closed his eyes briefly. In that small, nearly imperceptible moment, years of suspicion, fear, and isolation eased, just slightly. The voice continued. "We're activating the dormant protocol. Your signal reached the buried channel. Your instincts were right." Jack's breath released slowly, like a man who had been holding it for decades. "I told you it wasn't over," he murmured. To the people nearby, only half the conversation could be heard. But it didn't matter. The appearance of the black SUVs, the men in uniform, the tone in their voices, it all carried more weight than any explanation. Even Keller, always quick with sarcasm, said nothing. Lang leaned closer to Tina and whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Tina's hands trembled as she replied, "I don't know, but I think that old man just made a call the government's been waiting 20 years to hear." The truth didn't arrive in headlines. It didn't come with press conferences or flashing news alerts. It spread in fragments, soft murmurs between witnesses, half-classified reports, and a slow nod from a man whose silence had spanned decades. His name wasn't just Jack, and he wasn't just a forgotten vet at the edge of town. He was Colonel Jack Sutter, United States Army, retired, at least officially. In reality, no such retirement papers were ever filed. Once, long ago, Jack had been at the forefront of communications warfare. Not a man of rifles or battlefield medals, but one of encryption, frequency layering, and intelligence operations so quiet they left no sound. His battlegrounds were signals no civilian ever heard. His victories were messages intercepted, redirected, or never sent at all. Back in 1986, Jack helped design and field test an experimental matrix called Echo Ghost Light, a covert communication system built for Black Ops teams operating behind enemy lines in hostile terrain. It was engineered for emergencies, functioning on low-frequency pulses buried beneath randomized encryption so advanced that parts of the system still surpass modern capabilities. Ghostlight was a lifeline, a last resort whisper in the void, meant to connect agents even if the world around them fell silent. For a time, it worked, but then came an unsanctioned mission, deep inside Eastern Europe. Something failed. The team was cut off from the world and from each other. The operation disappeared from every record, a failure scrubbed from history. Jack Sutter was declared missing in action, presumed dead. His name placed on a list no one checked anymore. But Jack didn't die. He survived. Exactly how, no one is sure, not even the men who eventually found him. The few known details are sketchy, but consistent. Jack escaped. He crossed multiple borders, destroyed evidence, and carried memories. Memories no single man was ever supposed to bear alone. When he came back, there was no debriefing, no commendation. His file was sealed, his service quietly erased. No press, no medals, just silence, as if the man had become a ghost himself. For nearly 40 years, Jack drifted through the margins of America, living off a modest pension in the paranoia of someone who knew too much to rest. He wasn't hiding, he was listening. Watching radio bands, scanning static, decoding anomalies, waiting not for help, but for a signal. Lately, he'd begun hearing something. To anyone else, it was background noise. Static, a quirk of analog decay. But Jack recognized the rhythm buried in the distortion. A pulse, faint but deliberate. It didn't belong there. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was a ghost. Someone, or something, had reactivated a frequency that should have stayed buried. A compromised thread from the Ghostlight system. And if that signal was truly active again, it wasn't just a matter of classified information. It could lead to the unraveling of an operation so secret, so dangerous, that even whispering its name might awaken autonomous defense protocols that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Jack tried to warn them. He had tried everything, sent letters that went unanswered, emailed contacts who were long retired, even called military bases, pleading with the few connections he had left. But no one listened. Not then, not until now. Today, in the middle of a dry, forgotten stretch of highway, he walked up to a payphone. When dust-covered and rust curling around the edges of the receiver, the plastic faceplate clouded and sun-bleached. He fed in the exact change like he had rehearsed it in his mind 100 times. Then, with a steady hand and a mind sharpened by years of silence, he dialed a number the Pentagon believed had been erased decades ago. And for the first time in 39 years, someone answered. That call, brief, encrypted, spoken in clipped codes that hadn't passed through official channels since the Cold War, was all it took. The name Colonel Jack Sutter blinked to life in an active communication log. Not marked retired, not MIA, not deceased, but active. He had been a ghost for almost 4 decades, now suddenly, undeniably present. The men on the other end of the line didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Because by the time Jack ended that satellite patch call, systems deep within the national defense grid were already lighting up. Red flags tripped across firewall databases. Old alert systems flared back to life like some hibernating beast stirred from its den. Not because of Jack's voice, but because of what it had touched. Jack hadn't simply asked for assistance. He had awakened something buried. He had activated a failsafe, an ancient, near mythical contingency buried beneath the Department of Defense's oldest protocols. Something so obscure, so archaic, that barely a handful of engineers even remembered it existed. And Jack had spoken to it like it was an old friend. That payphone, long since ignored and nearly consumed by rust, had become the epicenter of the most sensitive national security alert since 1989. The choice of that phone wasn't by chance. Jack had chosen it carefully, precisely. In a world built on digital surveillance, where every modern call was tracked, stored, analyzed, analog phones, the few that still stood like relics of a forgotten era, operated in the shadows. Their signals were stubborn, hard to intercept in real time. Jack knew all of this. Of course he did. But he also knew something else. Something far more secret. There existed a single emergency frequency known to just 6 individuals across the entire United States defense structure. A line so secure, so deeply hidden, it was designed to survive even a nuclear event. It was called Echo Vector 9, an analog-only, unmodifiable signal band crafted in the early 80s for only the most catastrophic emergencies. Mass compromise, hostile takeover, or the accidental reawakening of buried Cold War assets. It wasn't connected to any computer system. It couldn't be updated. It simply was, hard-coded into legacy hardware and left to slumber. Until Jack picked it up. What he heard wasn't a message, not in words. It was a tone, a faint, pulsing identification sequence. 4 long beeps, 1 short, a pause, then repeat. It was a node signal, one meant to silently identify the reactivation of covert sleeper infrastructure. Nodes placed across the world, buried inside the bones of old communication lines. They weren't supposed to come online unless manually triggered or hacked by an unknown hostile force. Jack recognized the pattern instantly. He had heard it once before in 1986. It had haunted him ever since. And now, after nearly 40 years, it was back. He didn't hesitate. Most would have ignored it, dismissed it as static or a glitch. The Department of Defense almost did, until the transmission from the payphone arrived. It matched exactly down to the millisecond, one of 6 original Echo Vector authorization tones. And only one man ever had access to that particular sequence, Colonel Jack Sutter. Confirmation came within minutes from Fort Meade. The signal was authentic. A dormant node, assumed dismantled in 1994, had been reactivated. Its physical location was still classified, but its purpose had always been clear. A final conduit, a last resort failsafe for sensitive missions too dangerous, too politically volatile to ever be officially shut down. Someone had tripped it, either through forgotten analog hardware or an intrusion deep in the legacy code. They didn't know yet, but what they did know chilled every analyst in the room. Had Jack not intercepted and responded to the signal in time, the node would have escalated. And escalation meant execution, a deadly digital pulse designed to erase every linked record, wipe every connected drive, and eliminate every human contact associated with that shadow program. It would have burned files. It would have erased people. It would have, well, Jack Sutter stopped it. Not with guns, not with satellites or code breakers, but with a handful of coins and a fading payphone hidden in plain sight, forgotten by nearly everyone but him. And the machine, buried and patient, had remembered his voice. Jack sat still, hands resting on a cane that had seen as much life as he had. The brass at the Pentagon called it a miracle. Jack didn't. To him, it was simply listening, something he'd done every day for nearly 40 years. Not aimless, not obsessive, but precise, deliberate. He'd scanned those radio bands faithfully, digging through waves of static, filtering out the noise that the world had long since stopped hearing. Others thought he was chasing ghosts. They were wrong. He was guarding them. And in doing so, Jack Sutter, forgotten by the very system he once defended, reminded the world that sometimes the one who saves the system is the one it abandoned. By sunrise, the sleepy little gas station on the edge of town had transformed into the nation's focal point. Satellite trucks jammed the lot. News vans rolled in from Reno, Vegas, even California. Their dishes spun upward like strange mechanical sunflowers, hungrily reaching for signal. Reporters rehearsed lines with forced calm while producers scrambled behind them, phones pressed to their ears, trying to keep up with what had already spread like wildfire through secure networks and online forums. The facts were both astonishing and unshakably true. An elderly man had used a payphone to reawaken a Cold War-era defense protocol. And he'd been right. It wasn't just a military anomaly anymore. The moment had evolved into something else, something heavier, a public reckoning, a moral check on a nation too quick to forget its sentinels. The chatter wasn't just about reactivated nodes or encrypted codes. It became about Jack, about how people had looked at him and seen a relic, a burden, a man out of step with time, and how wrong they had been. Tina stood before a tight circle of cameras outside the sheriff's office. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she held a single page with shaky grip. She wore no lipstick, no foundation, nothing to soften the truth she now faced. Her voice cracked as she began, "I want to apologize to Colonel Jack Sutter." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't blink them away. "I mocked him. I judged him. I dismissed his pain as nothing but noise. But I was the one not listening. I hope he can forgive me. I'm sorry." By midday, every local channel aired her statement in full. Then came the official response. At 10:45 a.m., the Sheriff's Department issued a formal press release. It was short but clear. "We regret our handling and treatment of Colonel Jack Sutter," it read. "While our deputies acted on the information they had, we recognize that no man who has served this country, especially one of his caliber, deserves to be disrespected or dismissed. We offer our sincere apology and full cooperation with any military investigation." Sheriff Ward, who signed the statement, refused to give interviews. Whispers floated around that he had asked to speak to Jack privately, but Jack was already gone. He'd left the gas station quietly before first light, just as he always had. No cameras, no fanfare, just the sound of footsteps fading into silence. Still, the people came. By noon, the front of the gas station had been transformed. What had once been a tired brick wall now bore dozens of handwritten notes, faded unit patches, and polished challenge coins arranged with reverence. Veterans came in steady waves, some in weathered trucks, others in wheelchairs, a few on foot. They left their tokens by the old payphone, as if placing them at an altar. A small American flag had been staked beside the ice machine. Someone lit a candle and shielded the flame with cupped hands. One note, written in a quivering hand, read, "From one ghost to another, you were never forgotten. We were just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first." Inside, Tina sat near the window and watched. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched them come, one by one. Some stood in silence. Some saluted. None of them laughed, because now they knew the truth. Jack Sutter wasn't just some ragged old man muttering to static. He was a watchman, a guardian of something most people couldn't even see. And he had been right the entire time. A week later, that dusty little town where Jack had been ignored, dismissed, and nearly written off, hosted something it had never seen before. A full military ceremony. Not on a base, not behind some gate, but right in the town square. The courthouse lawn had been trimmed and cleaned. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the grass. Flags from every military branch flanked a modest podium draped in navy blue. Uniformed soldiers stood tall and still, their decorations glinting under the hot Nevada sun. Townspeople, veterans, reporters, even children lined the sidewalks and filled the seats. Jack Sutter sat in the front row. His trench coat had been pressed, maybe for the first time in decades. His hair was still wild, his posture still weary, but in that moment, his face, etched with lines of battle and time, held something deeper than pride. It held peace. Something different hung in the air that day. Something rare. Peace. Not the loud kind that follows victory, but the quiet kind earned after a lifetime of vigilance. On Jack Sutter's left breast, and beside campaign ribbons dulled with time and long since ignored by the world, was something new. A freshly reissued Defense Meritorious Service Medal, polished, engraved, and finally recognized. The colonel who pinned it to Jack's chest kept his speech short, but every word held weight. He spoke of Jack's decades of service, Not flashy, not headline-worthy, but vital. He called Jack a sentinel of forgotten systems, a man who stayed on watch when others had long stopped caring. Jack had stood his post alone, without expectation of reward or even acknowledgement. But today something had shifted. It wasn't until a younger soldier stepped forward that the ceremony truly changed. The man looked barely 25, nervous and stiff in his dress uniform. He cleared his throat, eyes flickering from the crowd to Jack, grounding himself in the elder veteran's gaze. "My name is Specialist Brandon Ruiz," he said. "I serve in cyber defense. A week ago, we were running diagnostics when a dormant protocol came online, one we didn't even know existed. Echo Vector 9. He paused, breathing in deeply. It was Colonel Sutter's old signal that made us look twice. We dug deeper because of him. If we hadn't, we would have missed something that could have cost lives." His voice grew stronger. This man didn't just stop a digital body breach. He reminded us all that silence isn't always safe, and that sometimes the one person still listening is the one who saves us all. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the applause came, not the kind you give out of politeness, but something heavier. Veterans stood first, their movements slow but full of meaning. Then townspeople followed. Some saluted. Some just stood in place and cried. When Jack was called to the podium, he moved slowly, carefully, age in his bones but strength in his steps. He needed no help, and when he stood before the microphone, he didn't clear his throat or wave or smile. He didn't have to. The silence welcomed him like an old friend. "You don't always need rank to do the right thing," Jack said, voice even and low, the kind of tone people leaned into without realizing it. "You just need to keep listening." He stepped back. No salute, no grand finale, just that. And in that simple moment, Jack Sutter was no longer the ghost by the payphone. He was the man who had heard what no one else did and answered. The ceremony faded with the light. The sun dipped behind the courthouse roof, casting long shadows over the square. Chairs scraped softly against concrete. Soldiers murmured quiet goodbyes, exchanging firm handshakes and nods of respect. No band played, no parade marched, just a stillness that said everything music never could. Jack didn't stay for photos or speeches. He stepped down from the stage with the medal still over his heart and walked away without a word. No news crew followed, no family met him with open arms, just the sound of his boots on cracked pavement, steady, familiar, the same as they had always been. He didn't head toward the veterans' tent or City Hall. He turned the other way, toward the edge of town, toward the gas station. The old Sinclair station still flickered with that failing neon buzz, the same hum it had carried for decades. And there it was, the payphone, quiet, still, untouched since the day Jack had made his silent call that changed everything. But this time he wasn't alone. Tina was already there, standing beside the phone. No uniform today, just worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and red eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. In her hands, she carried two things, a steaming cup of black coffee and a neatly folded American flag. Its creases perfect, its corners aligned with reverent care. When Jack approached, she moved forward, tentative, raw. "I didn't want to say it in front of the cameras," she said softly. "But thank you, Colonel, for everything." She held out the flag with both hands, not as a formality, not as protocol, but as something much more human. An apology, a gesture of overdue understanding, of seeing what she should have seen long ago. "I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner," she whispered. Jack looked at her, not through her, not around her, but at her, fully present. His eyes held no judgment, no resentment, just calm acceptance. He took the flag, then the coffee, and for the first time in longer than either of them could recall, he smiled. "That's okay," he said, voice carrying just enough warmth to linger in the air. Most people never do. They stood in that quiet together, not as hero and witness, not as veteran and officer, just two people, linked by a moment the world would never understand, bonded by a silence too deep for words. Behind them, the sun's final light caught the edge of the payphone, stretching its shadow long across the gravel. Jack turned, coffee in hand, and walked on. Alone, but no longer invisible. Jack Sutter's story isn't about secret protocols or Cold War alerts. It's about something deeper. It's about how we choose to see one another and who we forget to look for when the world moves on. In a world that moves too fast, where judgments are made in the blink of an eye and silence is too often misunderstood as weakness or confusion, Jack stands as a quiet reminder of something far more profound. He doesn't demand attention. He doesn't raise his voice. But within him lives a strength carved from experience and a wisdom that doesn't need applause to matter. He represents what we too often overlook: the steady power of dignity that chooses patience over pride, humility over noise. We walk past people like Jack every single day. Veterans, elders, quiet souls who have lived through wars, heartaches, and victories we can't begin to imagine. People who carry inside them entire lifetimes of service, of loss, of courage that once shaped the world and still does in quieter, unseen ways. But how often do we stop to ask, to listen, not out of politeness, but with real presence? Maybe the real tragedy isn't what's forgotten, but what's ignored. Not because it's hidden, but because we've stopped expecting greatness from those who don't announce it. In the constant buzz of our digital lives, with headlines screaming for attention and timelines rushing by, have we forgotten how to listen? Not just with our ears, but with our hearts. There are Jacks all around us, people whose stories are waiting, not to be told loudly, but to be heard deeply. And that leaves us with a powerful question. What are we missing? Not because it's out of reach, but because we no longer believe that greatness still comes from quiet places. This isn't just Jack's story. It's a reminder that behind every calm wound, every slow step, every silent presence, there may be someone who once held the line so others could move forward freely. Someone who never asked for praise, only the dignity of being seen. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you pause and think about the people you've passed by without a second glance, let that reflection live on. Share your thoughts. Have you ever misjudged someone only to later realize they carried a history that changed the way you saw them forever? Do you believe we as a society truly listen to our veterans, our elders, those who paved the way for us? Add your voice to the conversation. Keep it going for Jack and for every silent hero whose story deserves to be heard. And if this message meant something to you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell to join us as we share more real stories that shine a light on service, dignity, and humanity. Especially for those who carried our freedom, not with fanfare, but with quiet strength. And above all else, stay kind.